After years of whispers buried under royal silence, after carefully polished images and perfectly controlled narratives, a storm has finally erupted, and at the center of it stands Meghan Markle, and the man who refuses to stay quiet anymore, Tom Bower.
Meghan Markle yacht girl claims simply will not go away. And you know I've spoken about this before, but until now, no one in the mainstream media has been brave enough to go there. Well, that has just changed.
What you're about to hear isn't just another scandal. It's a collision of reputation, power, and a question that refuses to die. What did the palace really know, and when did they know it? Because here's where things start to feel uncomfortable. Not loud, not chaotic, but calculated. For years, critics came and went. Journalists spoke. Family members hinted. Allegations floated in and out of public view. Some were denied quickly. Others quietly ignored. A pattern formed. A pattern people didn't fully notice at first. Until Bower stepped in. This wasn't gossip dressed up as news. This wasn't emotional outrage. This was something colder, sharper, structured. Bower didn't just speak, he built. Every claim layered, every detail filtered through legal scrutiny. A man who doesn't publish unless he's ready to defend every word in court. And when his book Revenge dropped, it didn't just challenge Meghan's image, it tore into it. It painted her not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone highly aware, strategic, and always thinking several steps ahead. The kind of portrayal that doesn't just shake headlines, it shakes perception. And yet, silence. No explosive denial, no courtroom threats, no aggressive counterattack, just nothing. But silence can be louder than words, and people noticed. Then came the shift. As Bower prepared his next move, his next book, his next wave, something changed. The silence cracked. Suddenly, before the public even had full access to the material, responses began surfacing. Not calm responses, not measured clarifications, but sharp, dismissive language. Words like deranged, words like melodrama. That wasn't just defense, that was urgency. So the question started forming, why now? Why did this man trigger a reaction others couldn't? The answer sits in credibility. Bower isn't just another voice in the noise, he's a system. His work is built to survive attacks, legal attacks, media attacks, institutional pressure, and that makes him dangerous not because of what he says, but because of what he can prove. And timing, that made it worse, because by the time this second wave hit, public perception had already started shifting. The once unified support around Prince Harry and Meghan was fracturing. Questions were creeping in, interest was changing, the narrative wasn't as protected anymore, and right at that moment, Bower stepped forward again. But here's where things get strange. Even inside all that detail, all that investigation, something was missing. A subject that had followed Meghan for years, whispered in corners, debated online, quietly avoided in mainstream coverage, was completely absent. No mention, no confirmation, no denial, nothing. And for a man like Bower, who doesn't ignore uncomfortable truths, that absence didn't feel accidental. It felt deliberate. And that's when the real tension began. Because people stopped asking, what did he say? They started asking, what did he choose not to say? That silence became louder than any accusation. Because if everything in his work is chosen carefully, then what he leaves out must matter just as much as what he includes. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. It wasn't about the book anymore, it was about the gap inside it. A gap that pointed towards something far more explosive, something that hadn't yet been placed on record, something that, if revealed, could push this entire story into territory no one could control. And as that realization spread, something else started happening. The media began to change. Topics that once lived in the shadows started creeping into the light. Slowly at first, carefully, but noticeably. Writers who once avoided certain questions began testing them, not confirming but not dismissing either. And at the center of this shift, Bower. Not because he said it, but because he created the space where others could. That's the power of controlled silence. It doesn't close doors, it opens them. And then something even bigger happened. The question didn't stay hidden anymore. It crossed into print, not on a random blog, not on some anonymous forum, but inside one of the most established publications in the UK, The Spectator, a place where words are reviewed, examined, legally checked before they ever reached the public. And within that space, a single line changed everything. It didn't ask if something happened, it asked how many times. That subtle shift turned speculation into assumption. And once that line was printed, the barrier broke. Because now, it wasn't just being whispered, it was being acknowledged, not proven, not confirmed, but no longer ignored. And that's when things started connecting. Because the conversation didn't stop at questions, it expanded. It began pulling in names, places, connections. Enter Marcus Anderson, a name that keeps appearing. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly across key moments in Meghan's early life. Toronto, London, New York, exclusive circles, private networks, carefully curated environments where access isn't given, it's controlled. And Anderson wasn't just present, he was central. Introductions, logistics, access, influence, a bridge between worlds. And as those worlds overlapped, more names surfaced. Powerful names, connected names, names tied to networks that stretch far beyond celebrity culture. Not direct accusations, not confirmed links, but patterns. Patterns that don't scream, but linger. The same spaces, the same circles, the same repeated proximity. And when patterns repeat, people start asking why. Because coincidence has a limit. And then the image appeared. A single photograph, simple on the surface. A yacht, a group of women, sunlight, calm waters. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, except who was in it. Meghan Markle. Confirmed, real, verified. The date, August 2016, just weeks before her relationship with Prince Harry became public. At first, it seemed harmless, until the internet did what it always does. Arrows, labels, claims. One name in particular, incorrectly identified, spread fast, and for a moment, it looked like everything was about to explode. But then, correction. The misidentified person was proven wrong. And here's where it gets interesting. Because when the false claim collapsed, the conversation didn't die. It sharpened. What remained wasn't speculation. It was fact. A real image. A real moment. A real timeline. And sometimes facts are more dangerous than rumors because they don't disappear. They sit there quietly, forcing the question to stay alive. And now the question is louder than ever. If everything visible is verified, then what remains unseen? And why does the silence around it feel so carefully maintained? And just when it felt like the story couldn't get any heavier, it crossed a line no one expected. Not into tabloids, not into gossip columns, into a courtroom. Because this is where everything changes. When a story leaves headlines and enters legal territory, it stops being about what people think and starts becoming about what can be proven. And in this moment, the name that shifted the entire gravity of the situation wasn't Meghan, it wasn't Harry, it was David Boies, a legal heavyweight, a strategist, a man who doesn't move unless there's a reason. And when he spoke in December 2021, people who were paying attention felt the temperature drop because he revealed something that didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised stakes. While representing Virginia Giuffre in her explosive civil case against Prince Andrew, Boies admitted that his legal team had considered calling Meghan Markle as a witness. Let that sink in. Not a rumor, not speculation, a legal consideration. And in a courtroom, that means something very specific. It means relevance. It means proximity. It means there is some reason, however small, however indirect, that a legal team believes a person might hold information worth putting under oath. And here's what makes it even more intense. This wasn't a casual idea thrown into a long list. Boies himself explained that his team was working under strict limitations, only around 10 to 12 depositions allowed. Every name had to matter. Every choice had to serve a purpose. There was no room for curiosity, no room for maybe. So when Meghan's name entered that circle, even briefly, it wasn't random. It was calculated because at that point in time, Meghan was living in the United States, meaning she was within the court's jurisdiction. And more importantly, she had, at various points, moved within elite social environments that overlapped with figures connected to the case. Not directly accused, not targeted, but close enough to be considered. And that single detail quietly detonated everything because suddenly this wasn't just about media narratives anymore. This wasn't just about books, columns, or viral images. This was about the possibility, however brief, that questions could have been asked under oath in a controlled legal setting where silence isn't an option. And then, just as quickly as that door opened, it slammed shut. On January 12th, 2022, the case moved forward. The court rejected Prince Andrew's attempt to dismiss it. Discovery was approaching. Depositions were getting closer. The moment was building. And then, February 15th, 2022, settlement, reportedly around $12 million. Case closed. No depositions, no testimony, no Meghan on the stand. And just like that, the moment that could have forced answers disappeared. But here's the thing about moments like that. They don't vanish. They linger. Because the most powerful part of this entire situation isn't what was said in court, it's what was never said at all. What would have happened if the case didn't settle? What questions would have been asked? What answers would have been required? Those aren't just hypotheticals. hypotheticals anymore. They're gaps, and gaps create pressure. Now look at the pattern again. Over the years, Meghan and Prince Harry have shown something very clear. They respond when necessary. When staff allegations surfaced, responses came. When interviews sparked controversy, clarifications followed. When narratives threatened their image, statements were issued, carefully crafted, precisely worded. That pattern is undeniable. But within that pattern, there's an exception. One subject that never received a direct, detailed denial. No formal breakdown, no structured rebuttal, no point-by-point dismantling, just absence. And that absence has grown louder with time. Because instead of addressing specific claims, the response often shifted toward the people raising them. Critics were questioned, motives were challenged, language was used to discredit, but the core topic, untouched. And that's where things start to feel intentional. Because when everything else is addressed, but one thing isn't, people notice, and they ask why. And while all of this was unfolding, something else was happening in the background. The influence of Tom Bower wasn't fading, it was expanding. Because even though he never formally published certain allegations, his presence changed the environment around them. His credibility lowered the barrier. It made it harder to ignore questions that had once been dismissed instantly. He didn't need to say everything. He just needed to say enough. Enough to shift the conversation. Enough to make others speak. Enough to turn silence into speculation. And speculation into structured discussion across media, legal commentary, and public debate. And once that shift happens, it doesn't reverse. Because now the story doesn't belong to one person. It exists everywhere. In articles, in interviews, in records, in patterns. Shaped not just by what has been confirmed, but by what continues to remain unanswered. And here's the uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of all this. This isn't a story built on one explosive claim. It's built on fragments. A book that says a lot, but leaves something out. A media line that changes the tone of a conversation. A photograph that proves a moment, but raises new questions. A legal case that almost reached testimony but stopped just short. And a pattern of responses that speaks loudly, except in one specific direction. Individually, each piece can be explained, but together, they form something harder to dismiss. A pattern. And patterns don't demand belief. They demand attention. So now the real question isn't just about what happened, it's about why certain parts of this story feel like they're being held just outside of reach. Is this a buried truth slowly surfacing through shifting media and legal pressure? Or is it a narrative being reshaped in real time, guided by what is said and, more importantly, what is not? Because one thing is certain, the silence that once protected this story is no longer as strong as it used to be. And the deeper this goes, the harder it becomes to control what comes next.